Hi everyone. So I was going to do this as a live stream, and then I thought because of the importance of the content, I wanted to make sure that I don't get pulled off course with comments or things that are occurring in the live chat. So in order to do as much justice and give as much importance to this chapter in Mark, the Olivet Discourse, I am doing this as a pre-recorded video. For those of you who have not heard me talk about this before, for those of you who have heard me talk about this before, the Olivet Discourses in Matthew 24 and 25, because Matthew 24 and 25 is one Olivet Discourse, it's combined, is the same as Mark 13. There is a discourse in Luke 21 that is not the same, although parts of it are the same. What we observe about the Olivet Discourses on the whole, whether they be from Matthew or Mark or Luke, is that they are respective to Daniel 9:26 and Daniel 9:27. In Luke, and I'm just going to set the stage for the variation here so that we understand this. I have other videos besides that go through this, so maybe check those out. And if not anywhere else, they would be in the playlists for those respective chapters of Matthew 24 and 25 and Luke 21. But I will have discussed this in other videos besides. So this is not new. I actually wrote about this in my Daniel's 70 Weeks book as well. But in Luke 19, after the triumphal entry, two of the things that occurred in the outset of that was the casting of blindness and the prophecy of 70 AD. And that comes from Luke 19, where he says, he beheld the city and wept over it. And he said, if thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, which is synonymous with kingdom, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come upon thee that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, shall compass thee round and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. So in there is the prophecy of the casting of blindness and the prophecy of 70 AD. When the Olivet Discourses begin, the very first thing you're introduced to is that prophecy of 70 AD, where it says, shall lay thee even with the ground, thy children within thee, and they shall not leave in thee one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. That's where we actually pick up in this discourse in Mark 13. And I'm going to kind of cross-reference the discourses a little bit, because I think that the majority of folks are going to be way more familiar with Matthew 24 and 25 than they are with the other chapters. But there's probably familiarity with all of them regardless. But that's what he starts out with talking about in Matthew 24. Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, see ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And that's exactly how Mark 13 begins. As he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Jesus answering said unto him, see thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So this actually relates to the prophecy in Daniel 9:26. You know, we've talked about this so much. Usually in the context of Daniel 9:27, but in Daniel 9:26 it says, and Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's 4 days after the conclusion of the first 69 weeks of years. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. That's speaking about 70 AD. So the prophecy of not leaving one stone upon another is fulfilled in 70 AD. It was given, that prophecy was given as a recompense for Israel not knowing the time of their visitation on Nisan 11. Again, that's per Luke 19. So the Olivet Discourses in Mark 13 and Matthew 24 begin by linking it to the prophecy in Daniel 9:26. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Now there are two desolations mentioned. Two desolations specifically regarding that prophecy. The first would be in 70 AD. The second would be in the midst of the 70th week. So when we go to Luke, that's where it ties in very heavily to 70 AD. Luke 21 is not about the same things as Mark 13 and Matthew 24 are. Luke 21 picks up on Luke 19 with the discussion of 70 AD, and it really speaks about the events that they were to look for, the signs that they were to observe in order to get out of the city to preserve life. They bear much similarity to the other Olivet Discourses because there is a desolation in view, and yet the one in Luke 21 is not the midpoint of the 70th week abomination of desolation. It's the desolation decreed in 70 AD. So this is where we need to understand what relates to what. So we'll go through Luke 21. And I'll show you the difference here, because even the question that they're asked when the disciples come to Jesus on the Mount of Olives in Matthew 24, in verse 3, it says, he sat upon the Mount of Olives. The disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So the sign of thy coming and the end of the world is actually the glorious appearing, where it says, for as lightning cometh out of the east and shineth even unto the west, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be, in verse 27. This questions that they are specifically asking in Matthew 24 are related to the second coming specifically and the sign that they could observe of that event. Similarly, in Mark 13, we read the same thing. In verse 3, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? So it's the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world. And so those two discourses, or what is recorded in those two chapters, those two gospels, are going to be similar, almost identical. And yet that is not the same question that is asked in Luke 21. In Luke 21, it says, in verse 5, and some spake of the temple, how it was adorned with goodly stones and gifts. He said, for as these things which ye behold, the days will come in the which there shall not be one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. The question they asked him, they asked him, saying, Master, but when shall these things be? And what sign will there be when these things come to pass? It's not talking about signs of his coming and of the end of the world. It's talking about the sign related to when the temple is going to be thrown down. So what he does, similarly to Mark 13 and Matthew 24, is he starts with the seal judgments. Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ. The time draweth near, go ye not after them. That's seal 1. Ye shall hear of wars and commotions, but be not terrified, for these things must first come to pass, but the end is not by and by. Then he said unto them, nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. That's seal 2. There shall be great earthquakes in diverse places, seal 6, and famines, seal 3, and pestilences, seal 4. And fearful sights and great signs shall there be from heaven. Okay, so we're like, well, that's the same as the other two. And yet, here's the divergence. But before all these. So then he backs off talking about the 70th week, and he goes into talking about the lead up to and the inclusion of 70 AD, which is what they were specifically asking about, is what shall be the sign of when the destruction of the temple is going to occur, when there shall not be left one stone upon another that won't be thrown down. So he says, but before all these things, they shall lay their hands upon you and persecute you, delivering you up out of the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake, and it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts, not to meditate before what ye shall answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. So after he leaves in the lead up to 70 AD, that's what's going to occur. They're going to have hardship. And ye shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and some of you shall they cause to be put to death, and ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But there shall not an hair of your head perish. In your patience possess ye your souls. So here is where he gets to the sign of what they should look for, what they would need to look for of 70 AD, of when their temple is going to be destroyed, and there shall not be inly one stone upon another. The Daniel 9:26, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. Again, the first is 70 AD and the second is the 70th week. This is 70 AD. So he says, and when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, you know the desolation thereof is nigh. Again, respective to what he prophesied in Luke 19 and respective to Daniel 9:26. There is no army compassing Jerusalem about in the midst of Daniel's 70th week. It's a beast that goes into the temple and sits on the mercy seat and declares himself to be above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. That has nothing to do with Jerusalem being compassed about with armies and the temple being destroyed and one stone in the temple being destroyed, not desolated. It'll be desolated in the 70th week, but not destroyed like it was in 70 AD. So this is a reference to the what we know now from a historical reference point, the armies of Titus Vespasian in 70 AD. So in Luke 21:20, that's what it's talking about, is 70 AD, which is the prophetic fulfillment from Luke 19. When ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, you know the desolation thereof is nigh. Similarly to what we know will occur in the 70th week, they're also told to flee. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, let them which are in the midst of it depart out, let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. And obviously, it says, woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. The times of the Gentiles is the same as the fullness of the Gentiles, which takes them through the second half of the 70th week, when Revelation specifically says, regarding the temple, don't measure the outer court, it is given unto the Gentiles. The holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. So by default, we know that the times of the Gentiles and the fullness of the Gentiles are tied to the second coming. It takes you through the end of the second half of the 70th week. And then it talks about the signs that Jesus is coming and of the end of the world. Similarly to Matthew 24, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars shall fall from heaven, the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So the same signs in the sun, moon, and stars are referenced here in verse 25. There shall be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and looking for those things which are coming upon the earth, for the powers of the heaven shall be shaken, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man coming in the cloud of heaven with power and great glory. So we look at these from the perspective of, okay, there are similarities, but there are major, major differences between the discourses. Luke is 70, it starts with the 70th week, talking about the seal judgments, but then it says before all those things, and then it goes into what will be the fulfillment of the prophecy given 2 chapters previously of the destruction of the city and temple in 70 AD, and what that's going to look like. And then it says, from that desolation to the very end, which is what Daniel 9:26 says, the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and unto the end desolations are determined. So the end, there are 2 desolations that are determined in that time period, but the end in this context is characterized by the fullness of the Gentiles and the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled, which is up to and including the second coming of Christ, and then obviously the same signs in the sun, moon, and stars that are tied to the glorious appearing. So there is a vast distinction to make between Luke 21's Olivet Discourse and Matthew 24 and 25, which are tied to Mark 13. Part of the reason I wanted to go through this is because we're going to be very heavily focused in the similarities between Matthew 24 and Mark 13. But I didn't want to leave Luke 21 out. So I wanted to start there and show you how it's distinctly different and show you how it's tied to Daniel 9:26 and 27. Because yes, the majority of what I just talked about in Luke 21 is tied to Daniel 9:26, but obviously the seal judgments that it starts with are tied to Daniel 9:27. So the Olivet Discourses in total talk about the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, the end thereof shall be with the flood, unto the end of the war desolations are determined, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate, is linked to the times of the Gentiles being fulfilled and the fullness of the Gentiles. So these things are all taken in conjunction, but they're not necessarily all talking about exactly the same thing all of the time. So Luke 21 starts with talking about the seal judgments, which are respective to Daniel 9:27, the commencement of the 70th week. But then it backs off and it talks about 70 AD, which is the first of 2 desolations that Daniel prophesies. So going back to Mark 13 and Matthew 24, we understand that there's going to be something entirely different in view. It inversely starts talking about the Daniel 9:26. See these temples, or see these buildings of the temple complex, they're so great, but there's not going to be one stone left upon another. That's talking about 70 AD. But that's not the question that is in view that Jesus is answering in either Matthew 24 or Mark 13. The question he's answering is entirely different. Signs of his coming and of the end of the world. That has nothing to do with 70 AD and when the second temple is going to be destroyed. It's linked to his second coming. So we need to make very, very clear that we understand what questions are being asked and how those are different, and how his answer is respective to the specific questions being asked. And those, again, vastly different from Luke 21 than they are from the other 2 chapters. Now, sorry, my nose is running again. I should have gotten something to wipe it with. Whatever. I've been sneezing all day. My sinuses are going crazy, so it's all right. Well, warmer weather is on the way. We're happy about this. All right, so getting back to the text. We're going to focus in Mark 13, obviously. But I did feel it relevant and completely necessary to make some differentiations off the bat. Now, Mark 13. And yes, we will refer to Matthew 24 also. Because I think that it's just more significantly well known. So, again, respective to 70 AD. As he went out of the temple, one of his disciples saith unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. Jesus answering said unto him, Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. So that is a total reference to 70 AD and Daniel 9:26. But that's not the questions that his discourse is going to answer, because their questions are related to something else. So, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled? So all these things being fulfilled is related to the second coming. Jesus answering them began to say, Take heed lest any man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. That is seal 1. There is someone that will come from Israel to Israel for the purpose of confirming the covenant with many for 1 week. They won't understand the 1 week implication. We understand that because we know that the opening of seal 1 is tied to the commencement of that 7-year period. They're making it under the impression that they're reconfirming the covenant and rebuilding the temple, reinstituting the sacrificial system under the impression that it's kingdom, that it's long in duration. We understand that it's going to be a 7-year period, and so they're only going to get 3.5 years out of that. They will not be under that same impression. So he says, seal 1. When he says, when shall these things be? So when is talking about a chronology of time, and what shall be the sign when they're all fulfilled? So you're talking about a chronology of time that leads to a singular event, which represents the fulfillment of all things. The fulfillment of all things is linked to the 5th purpose for the 70 weeks, which is to seal up the vision and prophecy. So you're talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. Be ye not troubled, for such things must needs be, but the end shall not be yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. That's seal 2, the red horse, taking peace from the earth. There shall be earthquakes in diverse places. That's seal 6. And there shall be famines. That's seal 3. And troubles. And there shall, all these are the beginning of sorrows. You know, one of the things that, I talked about this in my video that is related to It's in my most important end times info playlist. And, well, it's in there. It's the 70 days to the 70 Jubilee years and 80 years to the flight dividing of the land. I think is the name of it. Something about the end times timeline or something like that. But all of these are the beginning of sorrows. Collectively, the opening of the seals. The seals represent conditions that will persist from day 1 through day 2520. There's going to be deception through the whole 7 years. There's going to be a lack of peace and or over war. There's going to be famines, pestilence, death, martyrdom, which wasn't mentioned here, but that's a salvation thing, not a judgment thing, and natural disasters affecting the earth. So the seals are representative things that are going to be ongoing from the commencement of the 70th week through the end of the 70th week. But what we are specifically told is that the seals collectively, Matthew 24:8 says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Interestingly enough, Psalm 90:10 brings us into, and that's why I brought up this other video. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, you probably might want to because it's interesting. But if you have, then you'll know that we link the 80 years. I never know exactly what I'm going to say until I'm talking, and so I'm like, where do I need to go? Psalm 90:10. The days of our years are 70. If by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off when we fly away. So there is a period of 70 in view, which is actually related to the Jubilees. So Psalm 90 was written 70 days before they entered the Promised Land. So from the time Psalm 90 was written, 7 days to the establishment of the Jubilee cycle, which is based on the land Sabbaths. So when they were to come into the land, they were to keep that Sabbath cycle count, and then in the 50th year, held and proclaim Jubilee. 70 days to the commencement of the count of 70 Jubilee years. The 70th Jubilee year is a separation event of the righteous and the non-righteous. The non-righteous stay behind. And that's why it says, if they be 80 years, I mean, if there's time on earth past that 70th Jubilee, it's going to be comprised of labor and sorrow, but it is soon cut off when we fly away. Yes, because the seals, which mark the start of the 70th week, are the beginning of sorrows. There is a point where Israel will be cut off and fly away. That's the flight of the remnant, the wings of the great eagle that fly the woman into her place where she's nourished for a time times half a time from the face of the serpent. I realize there's a million people talking about this 84 years of Israel. It's 80. It's the 80 thing. Marks the midpoint of the 70th week, which is 80 years from the institution of Israel in 1948. You know, if 1406, then 2025 is your 70th Jubilee. 3.5 years to the midpoint of the 70th week puts you at 2028. That is the end of their time in Jerusalem. There's a couple of key words here that we need to understand in order to understand the midpoint, how it relates to the end of their time in Jerusalem, the end technically of, I want to say their sorrows, but it's not the end of their sorrows. It's that the seals are the beginning of sorrows. Travail upon a woman with child, and she will not escape. So it's the beginning of a bad time. But the end is characterized by their physical time in Jerusalem because there's going to be a flight out of it. So any years that Israel gets beyond the 70th Jubilee are characterized by labor and sorrow because it's travail upon a woman. The 70th week is going to commence, and all these are the beginning of sorrows. But they are soon cut off and we fly away, which is a reference to the midpoint, which is the end that he's talking about here. In Matthew 24, it makes this more clear, which is, I'm going to guess, why people have a deference to Matthew 24 rather than Mark 13. There are two references to the end in Matthew 24. Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, shall deceive many. Seal 1. You shall hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that ye not be troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Rather, the opening of the seals is the beginning of sorrows. And it says the end is not yet. What is the end? For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famine, seal 3, pestilences, seal 4, earthquakes in diverse places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. So again, we go back to that Psalm 90, and it says, if Israel is given more time beyond that 70, if they be 80 years, yet is their strength comprised of labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. So the end is respective to their flying away. And then it says in Matthew 24, continuing, they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, shall kill you, you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Continuing on verse 13, it says, but he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. What's the end? Verse 14, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come. So the end is tied to the preaching of the everlasting gospel, which is trumpet 7. Why? Because the preaching of the everlasting gospel is the angel that flies through the midst of the heavens, saying, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven, the earth, the sea, and the fountains of waters. Which is then immediately preceded by the abomination of desolation, which there's a command to, when you see this, leave. And that feeds into Daniel 12, Michael shall stand up, the great prince, which stands for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time. But at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. Delivered because Michael, the wings of the great eagle, is going to fly Israel into a place where she's nourished for a time times half a time from the face of the serpent. And that's what it says in verse 20 of Matthew 24. Pray that your flight not be in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. So you have this time past the 70th Jubilee, which if Israel isn't saved, then they're going to be on earth for. The beginning of that time period is characterized by labor and sorrow, but it's soon cut off and we fly away, which is a reference to the midpoint of the 70th week, which is the end of their time in Jerusalem. I realize that there's a whole bunch of people who like to mess with that day is going to be shortened thing. By their physical time in Jerusalem is shortened by their flight out at the midpoint of the 70th week because Michael takes them to safety. It's not a shortening of the number of days of the 70th week. It's not a shortening of the number of hours per day in the 70th week. It is physically their time in Jerusalem is brought to an end by their flight out of there. That is the end that Matthew 24 is talking about. Not the end of the 70th week. It's the end of Israel's time in Jerusalem at that 80 years. So then you say, okay, well, if 1406, then 2025 would be the commencement. 3.5 years is 2028 is the midpoint. What is that the 80th year from? 1948. So it's not this whole 84-year business that people are talking about. It's 80 years that's relevant. It's relevant to Psalm 90:10. So from the time that Psalm 90 was given, they had 70 days to entry into the promised land. That entry into the promised land served as the benchmark event to begin the count of the Sabbath cycles, which lead to direct declaration of the Jubilee. There will be 70 Jubilees from the commencement to the end, and then any time past that will be comprised of labor and sorrow, but it's soon cut off and we fly away. The sorrow is the opening of the seals, and the cut off and fly away is the midpoint of the 70th week, which is the end of that 80, if they be 80 years. So 2028 minus 80 is 1948. And that's where I think people are looking for to try to figure out what the last generation is, which they then take from this chapter also. So there's a lot of information kind of packed into these, like differentiating them between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then, you know, the prophecy of Psalm 90 being built into this. What are they talking about? Are they talking about 70 AD or the 70th week? And literally just building the specificity into the timeline of all of these events from Daniel 9, 26, and 27. They are glorious in the amount of information they hold. And then also how they're specifically relevant to the book of Revelation as well. So having said all that, let's continue in Mark 13, which will present much the same information as Matthew 24 that I just went through. So, talking about the opening of the seals are the beginning of sorrows. Take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils, and in the synagogues you shall be beaten, and you shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake and for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published among all nations. That's talking about the preaching of the everlasting gospel at trumpet 7. But when they shall lead you and deliver you up, take no thought beforehand what you shall speak, neither do you premeditate, but whatsoever shall be given you in that hour, that speak ye, for it is not ye that speak, but the Holy Ghost. Now the brother shall betray the brother to death, and the father the son. The children shall rise up against their parents, and shall cause them to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. Enduring to the end is those who live to make it to see the flight of the remnant, the abomination of desolation, and thus the flight of the remnant, and go with Michael. That's the end. That's the end. Not the second coming of Christ, although those who are spared in that event, the flight of the remnant, they will see the second coming of Christ 3.5 years after that. But that's not what it's referring to. The end is characterized by the flight of the remnant out of Jerusalem at the end of those first 3.5 years. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand, then let him which be in Judea flee to the mountains, let him which is on the housetop not go down into the house, neither enter therein to take anything out of his house. And let him which is in the field not turn back again for to take up his garment. But woe to them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days. Pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, for in those days shall be affliction such as was not from the beginning of creation, which God created unto this time, neither shall be. And except the Lord had shortened those days, no flesh should be saved. Meaning that if he hadn't provided a way out of Jerusalem by the flight of the remnant, either they would have physically died because they refused to worship the beast's image or take his mark, or they would have died spiritually because they did worship the beast's image or receive his mark. This is the grace of God demonstrated in the midst of the 70th week for the Jewish people, that he's giving them an out. For the elect's sake, Israel's sake, whom he hath chosen, he hath shortened the days in Jerusalem by giving them a way out. And then if any man shall say to you, lo, here is Christ, or lo, he is there, believe him not. For false Christ and false prophet shall arise. That's beast 1 and beast 2 from Revelation 13, referring to the second half of the 70th week. And shall show signs and wonders to seduce, if it were possible, even the elect. But it won't be possible because they will have been preserved and protected by Michael in the wilderness for that time, times and in half. But take ye heed, behold, I foretold you all things. But in those days after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light, the stars of heaven shall fall, and the powers that are in heaven shall be shaken. Then shall they see the Son of Man coming in the cloud with power and great glory. And he shall send his angels and gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost parts of the earth unto the uttermost parts of heaven. That actually relates to Deuteronomy 30. There are way too many people who think that he's going to be gathering the saints during that time period. It's like, no. The rapture, the Lord himself descends from heaven with a shout, the voice of the archangel with the trump of God. He does it himself. After the tribulation of those days, it's going to be him giving his angels the command to go gather his people and bring them back to Jerusalem from whither they have been scattered. And this is the fulfillment of the prophecy in Deuteronomy 30. It shall come to pass when all these things are come upon thee, the blessing and the curse which I have set before thee, and thou shalt call them to mind among all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath driven thee, and shalt return unto the Lord thy God, and shall obey his voice according to all that I command thee this day, thou and thy children with all thine heart and with all thine soul. That then the Lord thy God will turn thy captivity and have compassion upon thee, and will return and gather thee from all the nations whither the Lord thy God hath scattered thee. If any of thine be driven out unto the uttermost parts of heaven, from thence will the Lord thy God gather thee, and from thence will he fetch thee. And the Lord thy God will bring thee into the land which thy fathers possessed, and thou shalt possess it. And he will do thee good and multiply thee above thy fathers. So giving his angels the command to go gather his folks and bring them back into Jerusalem is what Deuteronomy 30 relates to. So he shall send his angels and gather together, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from the uttermost parts of earth to the uttermost parts of heaven. So the parable of the fig tree. So now we've gone from understanding the confines of the 70th week, from the opening of the seals to the second coming of Christ. So we understand the answer to the question, the signs of his coming and the end of the world, which is the glorious appearing, which is when all of these things shall be fulfilled. Now we're moving into parable language, which is telling specific truths about the two groups of people who are going to be left at the second coming. That's what Matthew 24 is. After the conclusion of Jesus giving his angels the command to go gather the elect and bring them back to Jerusalem. Then you move into the parable of the fig tree. Then you move into a whole bunch of other parable speak, which is the remainder of the Matthew 24 and the whole of Matthew 25, which talks about two groups of people that will be left at the second coming, believers and unbelievers. Believers are going into the kingdom to celebrate the marriage supper of the Lamb. Unbelievers are being excluded from the kingdom. Though it's very simple, when you're reading through all of the rest of Matthew 24 after that and all of Matthew 25, it's talking about two groups of people, and some are going into the kingdom and some are not. And that's based on their positionality in Christ. So the rest of the discourse in Mark 13, very, very short. It excludes the vast majority of that. But for those of you who have questions about Matthew 24 and 25, it is literally half a dozen different ways of saying the exact same thing. Whether it's the wise and foolish virgins. Wise, wisdom is an attribute of the Holy Spirit. Foolish means absent of the Spirit. So you've got the wise going into the marriage supper with Jesus, and the foolish not. They're being excluded from the kingdom and from the marriage supper because they're not believers. You have the parable of the talents, where you have two who did good while the master was away, and he says, enter thou into the joy of the Lord. That's kingdom. And the other one, the wicked, slothful servant, evil servant, he was kicked out. He was not allowed into the kingdom. Separation of the sheep and goats. The sheep are the righteous going to the kingdom, which is prepared for you from the foundation of the world. And the goats are going to be cast into hell, prepared for the devil and his angels. And that's the days of Noah. You know, the separation of the righteous versus the wicked. The goodman of the house, if he'd known, or the evil servant who said, my master delays. Obviously, evil servants are going into the kingdom. You know, so it's all respective to the two groups of people, believers or unbelievers. And the command is given to watch the signs, because remember, and we went over this, well, I made that video private. I kind of went off a little bit. About how people want signs, how the Jews specifically want signs. Hello, there's a big, huge one in the midpoint of the 70th week in Revelation 12. Hello, sign, look at me, so you know what time of the year the midpoint of the 70th week is. But specifically for the Jews who are always seeking signs, he's like, 70th week and second coming is going to be sign heavy. So if you're looking for a sign, you're going to get them. Watch. That's what he tells people. Specifically, it's unbelievers, but it's also written in the context of Jews who are always looking for a sign. Well, they're going to get a lot of them. So pay the heck attention, folks. Like, if that's what you are looking for, pay the heck attention. Yeah, for 1 Corinthians 1:22. For the Jews require a sign, and the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Greeks foolishness. But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. So, it's kind of like, if this is what you guys are always intent on needing, because remember the Pharisees came tempting him, seeking a sign, and he's like, the sign of Jonah, that's all you're going to get. And by the time you realize what that meant, it's too late. But that's basically what the rest of this chapter is. So, now learn the parable of the fig tree. Parables speak. When the branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So he says, if you're looking for summer, if that's your end goal, you're going to have signs that summer is on its way. So if you're looking for the fig tree bearing fruit, then there's going to be a progression of events that you know that's forthcoming based on it putting out leaves and blossoms and things like that. So if your end goal is the return of Christ, the signs that immediately precede it are the 70th week. If and since you're looking for this, they're looking for the second coming, that was the context of the question they were asking, and the 70th week is the immediate preceding signs, there's a day count attached to that. Very, very specific. So again, the parable of the fig tree. When the branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So if summer is your end goal, then you know that summer is on its way when there's leaves on the fig tree. In the same manner, when you see all these things come to pass, 70th week specific, know that it is nigh even at the doors. So when you see the seals open, the 70th week has commenced, there's a day count to the arrival of the Messiah. He's on his way. He says, verily I say unto you that this generation, it's the terminal generation who sees the opening of the seals up to and including the 70th week, will not pass till all things be done. He says, heaven and earth shall pass away, which is tied to the second coming. Specifically, 2 Peter 3, it's the day that the heavens and the earth, which are now, are kept in store, reserved unto fire, under the perdition of ungodly men. But he says, my words will not pass away, which means that what he's saying will be fulfilled. But of that day and hour, which is the day that the heavens and the earth pass away, knoweth, which is the Greek word eido, which means to have seen or perceived, hence to know, its experiential reference point. No man, so mortal created being with a finite lifespan, has never seen the events of the passing of the way of the heavens and the earth by fire now. So theoretically, conceptually, we can read about it, but having experiential knowledge, nobody does. Not man, mortal, created being, finite lifespan. The angels, immortal created beings, infinite lifespan from their creation, but still hasn't happened in their life. And not the Son in his humanity had the heavens and the earth passed away during his life either. Only the Father. All prophecy is based in foreknowledge. All prophecy is based in foreknowledge. Mark 13 is almost exclusively prophecy. So Jesus is prophesying because he's God in the flesh. But in the flesh, as the Son of Man. So as the Son of God, he's prophesying. But as the Son of Man, the heavens and the earth had not passed away. None of the events that he's prophesying about have happened in his natural mortal lifespan. So we need to differentiate when it says that the Son didn't know either. Know, which means to have seen or perceived, hence to know specifically through experiential visual reference point. It's talking about the Son in his humanity, not the Son of God in his deity. So it's talking about God's foreknowledge, and there is a day reserved for the passing away of the heavens and the earth, which is tied to Jesus' second coming. So then, to the Jews requiring signs, what does he say? Take ye heed, watch and pray, for ye know not when the time is. That is also the Greek word eido, which means to have seen or perceived, hence to know. It has nothing to do with the calendar date. It has nothing at all to do with the calendar date. Please do not mistake that. I have another video in my most important end times info playlist that begins with the word knoweth, which goes through the context of these verses, specifically Matthew 24, but it applies to Mark 13 also. Go check that out if you are unclear. Verse 34, for the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his house and gave authority to his servants, and to every man his work, and commanded the porter to watch. Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at even or at midnight, or the cock crowing, or in the morning, lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping. And what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch. So, be careful when you're reading those not to take them out of context. It has nothing to do with the calendar day or time of day that Jesus is returning. Zechariah 14 is very clear that Jesus is coming back in the evening. It says, at evening tide it shall be light, glorious appearing. As lightning cometh from the east and shineth even in the west, so also shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Jesus is coming back in the evening. And Psalm 35, I think, where it says, his anger endureth for an evening, but joy cometh in the morning. We know exactly what time of day Jesus is returning at the second coming, which is evening, probably immediately after the day is over, and when 6 p.m. begins, the evening begins the next day. Evening and morning were the first day. So that evening to evening is the Hebrew calendar day. He's coming back in the evening, probably immediately after the day change is over, and it's no longer Nissan 9 or whatever. But just be careful about misconstruing what it means to know with calendar dates, because that is totally outside the scope of this, and time of day is actually also outside the scope of this. There are other things intended of this. and it's parable speak. So make sure that you're not conflating parable, which is a teaching that's just, it's a figurative teaching, with the spiritual truth, which with literal interpretation. Make sure you're keeping each of those things in their own boxes. And again, I've got a couple videos that you can reference if you're unclear on the timing of some of these things. Let me go to my playlist and I will tell you what those are. But most important end times info playlist, they are the last, it's the second to last video. It's called Knoweth or To Know, Matthew 24, 35 and 36, Mark 13, 31 through 32, 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 5, and Acts 1, 6 through 7. And then there is another video which is called The Timeline to the End Times, 70 Days to 70 Jubilee Years, and 80 Years to Flight/Dividing the Land. Both of those are going to be pertinent to this chapter. If you have not taken the time to view those, I would encourage you to do so. In the interim, thank you for your time. I hope that if you had questions about these, they have been answered. I'll see you later.